Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. Super excited. Mike Huber is here. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
And we're talking about your new book, The Power in Pretend, Supporting Children's Power, Identity, and Agency, which by the time this comes out will have been out a couple of months, probably. Um, uh, and really, I, I read it so fast. when I got it. So let me just do the quote so we can get that out of the way, and then we'll
Okay.
start the conversation. So very early in the introduction, you wrote, I was originally asked to write a book about gunplay, but I was hesitant. In fact, I was ready to turn it down. Then I went to opening night of the movie Barbie and was struck by how empowered so many people felt watching a story about a doll from their childhoods. This doll had the power to be anything: a doctor, a lawyer, a mermaid, even the president. While there was a plethora of media coverage that was surprised that a movie about something as silly as a doll could be a blockbuster. That's when I realized what was missing in writing only about gunplay. There was an artificial binary underlying most attitudes about gunplay. Boys are more likely to engage in gunplay, which is often considered scary. At the same time, girls are more likely to play with Barbie and other dolls, which is often considered silly. But both types of play get to the core of what drives most children: imagination and a sense of power. Of course, I have to start with something from the Barbie movie.
Of course. I mean, yeah, it's one worth watching and rewatching. So.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
so talk about that a little bit more, maybe just talk about the book in general, and then I've got, of course, some things I
Yeah.
want to jump in and ask you about.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, some of my conversation around power had been going on for decades, right? Like, oh, kids like roles of power. And I used to always say the most powerful things a kid can think of is um, someone with a gun or mom, whatever. But still, of course, gunplay, I've done presentations about it specifically because it is one that a lot of people struggle with,
Hmm.
and for good reason, because firearms are a leading cause of death for children and
Right.
teens. Um, so I don't want to minimize that, but at the same time, this pretending, it's like this weird thing adults have of like, oh, it's just pretend, and then but this thing, that's real, and it never seemed to make sense to me. And so when they asked me, yeah, I was hesitant. And it was the Barbie movie. And I went with six people. They were all roller girls. They knew each other from roller derby.
Hmm.
I am not a roller girl, but was invited to come along, and we all had to dress up as, favorite Barbie. I grew up as dressed up as Alan. Um, Most
God,
I
Alan.
actually had toyed with dressing up as Barbie and then did not want to lose the beard, but also wanted to be true to the
Uh-huh.
doll I was representing. So, and now that I think about it, Alan does not have a beard either. So
He might have at some
I
point.
failed.
We don't know.
He
We
might
don't
have
know
been,
his whole
that's true.
life.
That's true. That's true. But yeah, so anyways, I was at the movie and it was like, I could just see these people just like, that like those like, oh yeah, like,
Hmm.
like that feeling. And it was in between when I was told what they wanted me to write about, and then 2 days later or whatever was going to be the meeting about
Uh-huh.
it. And so, in rewatching the movie, there's actually a part of the movie where the actress playing Ruth, what's the name of the inventor? Ruth Singer? No, Ruth, the person who invented the
Yeah.
Barbie doll,
Right.
is a character in the movie, and she talks about the way it's endless. The
Uh-huh.
whole idea of Barbie is that there's no end point.
Hmm.
That's the power in it. It's like you could always imagine something new. And that's, essentially what, in her case, you're saying what girls need, sort of thing,
Hmm.
right? And I wish I should have looked up the actual uh um lines from the movie because now I
Yeah.
can't remember exactly. But it was that gist. And I know that must have been the point when I heard that, thinking about this pretend play around guns and this, already having been in the theater for an hour, over an hour by the
Yeah.
time that speech comes up, of like, oh, that's it, right? That
Hmm.
it's the doll itself, the gun itself, whatever the prop or the theme of the play is, that's not the point. It's the, oh, I can be anything I want. And that idea of power and pretending power is the key, right? That
Hmm.
is what kids do, whether they're a lion or a dinosaur or someone with a gun or a superhero or a mom or the president or whatever all the other things were, right? And so that's when I realized, like right then and there, like, oh, I think there's something here. And then
Hmm.
on the way out, I was talking to one of the women I was there with, and I asked her, so did you play with Barbies when you were a kid? And she said, no, I played with trucks and can't remember the other thing,
Uh-huh.
whatever. But yeah, basically trucks.
Hmm.
And it like hit me, right? Of like, oh, right. Again, like things where these big, powerful trucks that, move stuff and are loud and like
Yeah.
it's still about power. And yeah, so then I just realized that's the thing I think I want to write about because that's a
Hmm.
common thing. All kids want a sense of power, both in real life, but also I think that pretend, especially that age, whatever, 3 to 6 roughly.
Hmm.
And Vygotsky very clearly defines that age as a separate thing where pretend is the place.
Right.
You do all these things so that you can be a head taller and all this
Yeah.
language. But he's talking about very specifically that age. And later we use our imagination in other ways for a sense of power. But at this
Hmm.
age, it's so embodied that I realized that's the thing I want to write about because gunplay doesn't, it's like, I mean, you can write about it, but, I knew Kisa was already working on
Right.
something and I had liked, other books I'd read about it.
Hmm. Yeah, there are
So,
other things out there. If
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the thing you really want to focus on. Yeah. So I was just thinking as you were talking, because there's the big speech. I don't want to make this a Barbie movie podcast. I mean, I kind of do, but I'm not going to. We can
right,
do that
right,
another time. But when you're talking about Ruth's speech from the end, I was like, I hadn't connected it myself to America Ferrara's speech in the middle,
earlier,
where
yeah,
she's talking about how powerless and frustrating it is, feels to be a woman sometimes, and then Ruth's like, no,
right,
you. That's exactly what Barbie's for.
right. And those two speeches together, because that's when America's character, like, oh, that's the thing I've been missing. That's the
Yeah,
thing I feel so bad about. And yeah, imagining it
yeah,
is the first start. And honestly, imagining it is the step to
yeah.
making it
And
real.
I think pretend play is always valued because it's a play that is easy for adults to recognize when it is like um, kitchen play or I've set up a post office and so here's your pretend play. But you go so much deeper into, it is really cute and funny to watch how they pretend.
Right.
And pretend is easy for us to recognize, but there's a lot maybe that we're not seeing.
Hmm.
You talk about understanding from the outside. Um, and one of the things that I have green flagged as a question for the podcast, for those of you who
Okay.
are following my annotation journey, um, children do learn through play, of course. They gain knowledge, experience, and understanding. From the outside, we assess aspects of knowledge and understanding that are worthy of being thought of as learning. And I think that's where playing with dolls or playing with guns might
Right.
be, um, it's a cute thing, but we got to get back to the real learning or the pretend that I planned out for you,
Right.
maybe.
Right. Yeah. Or like we're playing restaurant, so let's all write a menu because I
Yeah.
want to get my literacy in.
Right,
Or
right. Yeah.
yeah. And um, yeah, and I think that's the part that I'm sure I did, I know I did.
Sure.
I'm not sure how long I did it, but it was a slow journey to like, oh, wait, there's other things there. I think the first thing I noticed was socially, they're connecting. Kids who pretend
Hmm.
together are friends. Like that's almost how they define it. And for many kids, how they define it. And when the person I've decided is my friend won't pretend with me, the world has just ended, right? Like
Right.
it's like
Yes.
devastating, right? So they're like, I knew that socially this was really important.
Hmm.
Um, but then like with the other things, it's like, oh, but I can't, how could I record something that they're doing in terms of this or that? And in fact, one of the things, because for a while I was training for the state for Minnesota about our learning standards, and they're, nowadays every state, the standards are pretty much the same
Hmm.
in every state. There's very few, but what I found interesting, and I would start the workshop with, was find pretend play in here,
Yeah.
right? And people would go to those surface things, right? Of like, oh, well, when they pretend, sometimes they,
Right.
whatever,
They
maybe a
have a
few people would know
conversation.
they have a conversation. Some people would know that, children who pretend more have a bigger vocabulary, right?
Hmm.
So some people would know that um, statistic or that data point or whatever. But most people, like, it was hard to find. And I said, and how much time do the 4-year-olds you work with pretend?
Hmm.
Right. And so to me, I wasn't trying to diss the standards in that point. That was what I was getting paid to, like to actually present them. But just that point of like, I didn't want people to look at it and think this is like everybody should be doing these things equally,
Hmm.
but more that, yeah, these are things that we want to keep track of for, this idea of school readiness or
Hmm.
whatever. Um, and I don't want to diminish that in that sense of, there is an achievement gap and all that, but I think it actually comes from that sense of agency more than
Hmm.
anything else.
Sure.
Certainly there are pre-academic skills kids can develop, but without that sense of agency, that doesn't mean anything. But so I think the
Right.
standards, sometimes people will see it and it's a checklist and okay, let's do this, then this, then this. And it's like, no, let's pretend. Let's give them real work, be real parts of the community. That's why I thought it was so important to have that one
Uh-huh.
chapter in the book about giving them real power.
Right.
That because on its own, they're not going to develop, they will play a sense of agency, but if they don't really have it, they're not actually going to develop a sense of agency. So for me, it was like all tied together, but it was that idea that we can lose sight when we look at standards of
Hmm.
what kids are actually doing is pretending. And when they're pretending, there's a lot
Right.
going on. And it's mostly internal, which also gets to the point of
Uh-huh.
banning gunplay doesn't work because whatever the thing is that they are trying to embody, work out, work through, whatever, pretend,
Uh-huh.
you can tell them to not do it in the room. The thoughts are still in their head. So
Right.
all you've done is taking yourself out of the conversation. And that one I know comes from, oh my God, the Warplay Dilemma, Diane
Uh-huh.
Levin and
Nancy Carlson Page.
Nancy Carlson Page. Thank you. Um, because I want
I
to make sure
wouldn't
I
have
get
gotten
credit.
Diane Levin, so it was good we were
Okay,
together
there
for
we go.
that.
Um, well, with her, I actually met her once when I
Yeah.
was talking. We were talking about middle grade literature and stuff, and then suddenly
Uh-huh.
I see her name tag, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
I would
No,
have
I mean,
been
I haven't read that
wouldn't be able
book,
to talk.
so yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I know who
but yeah, but
Diane
I
is.
think
Yeah.
that book really talking about that thing of you can be part of the conversation or you can take yourself out.
Yeah,
And if you're really worried about kids resorting to firearms later in life, then it would make sense to be part of the
for
conversation.
sure. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that idea that you can only stop the outward
Hmm.
expression, you can't stop someone's inward
Yeah.
thoughts and feelings, and so you have to decide if you want to be part of that and be a trusted
Hmm.
person
Who's
with
safe to work
the
those
child.
inward things through
Yes,
with,
exactly.
around. Yeah. I think um it can just go so much deeper than the standards and the checklists. Like those are nice. I use them, when I'm
Right,
working
of
with
course.
students. I
Yeah,
use them when I was a teacher, but it can actually be so much deeper. And if we know, and we should know at this point, all of us should know that learning happens best when what we're doing is relevant to the child. Post offices are not relevant. They're a very popular pretend play setup, but they're not relevant for most
right,
children. The only way we really find out what's relevant is by watching how they're playing
right.
and starting there. And that's kind of that internal being made external for us.
Right, right.
to try
Yeah,
and
yeah. And
figure
it's
out.
funny because if you do play the post office, you'll see them use the props you brought in for something completely
Right.
different.
Yeah.
And whatever, again, like past Mike would have just, oh, that's cute,
Yeah.
rather than, oh,
Yeah.
are these props enough for what they are using them for? Are there things I might want to add to
Uh-huh.
really enhance what they're
Yeah.
doing? And, obviously imagination goes a long way. So I don't need to, have every single thing. Oh, they're pretending it's a rocket ship. Therefore, I need
Yeah.
to go
Yeah.
spend 12 hours making a rocket ship
Turning
out of
this in.
cardboard from something I saw on Pinterest or something. Or I give them the
Yeah.
box and let
Yeah.
them decide what it is.
Yeah. I mean, those are
So,
just, I mean, I think that's just in my head because it's such a traditional thing
yeah.
that we have to turn our pretend play area into something else every week so that kids
Yeah.
don't get bored and so that we can, use the vocabulary we want to use.
Right.
I know it comes from a place of understanding elements of how of children's
Yeah.
learning and what's important, but at the expense of all this other rich
Yeah.
kind
And I
of
didn't
play
even think about
sometimes.
that. But, because I had a classroom where I was really allowed to explore, experiment, whatever. Um, when, for more than 15 years, where it was just me and 10 older preschoolers. So what it
Fun.
allowed me to do, my pretend area, first of all, it didn't call it a house area, right?
Uh-huh.
I called it pretend, and it grew so that I had a fairly small classroom, but a third of it was basically for pretend. There was a little
hmm
alcove that had a couch. It was the cots basically, but we had a top on top of the cots
Right.
with computer keyboards, right? So it became the office. And then around the corner was like a stove, refrigerator, and then there's a dresser drawer right next to the stairs that went up to a loft. And along the stairs on the wall were hooks for, like, they're usually scarves with Velcro, so they were often used as
Uh-huh.
capes, but they could also be kind of under your arms to make more of like a dress, or at your waist to be a skirt,
hmm
like they could be used for a lot of things,
Yeah.
or to wrap up treasure or whatever. But so, the pretend area always had like a set of tools, plastic tools, whatever, replicas, kitchen items, um, office items, like,
hmm
office worker type items, couch, and upstairs, like all of these elements, and they spread out. I didn't just jam them all into one box, but it was just me kind of following what the kids did. But it really just took over. It would
hmm
take over most of the room most of the time in some
hmm
way. And sometimes it was Star Wars, and sometimes it was family, and sometimes, it was ballet class, and sometimes
hmm
it was West Side Story, oddly enough, but just the opening dance sequence. But
Sure, right.
uh, the kids couldn't actually snap,
Right.
uh, but they'd hum that part. The one child's father was a musical director or theater
Uh-huh.
director. So.
Uh-huh.
But anyways, like, just that idea that I spent a long time, just what if I, really just make space for this
hmm
play. And it wasn't the only type of play that happened in the room. Sometimes the rest of the room was covered in mats and kids were wrestling. Sometimes it was blocks. The art area had like a riser, like a 1 foot by 4 foot, so like half a shelf basically.
hmm
And it separated the block area from the art area, but it could just slide. So, oh, a lot of kids are oh, we need more space for drawing and painting, and then,
Uh-huh.
oh, we need more room for blocks, so we could just slide it back and forth.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes the riser had been incorporated into the pretend play.
Sure.
Like it just, and I think a lot of people like will things will move beyond the pretend area or whatever.
hmm
But I think for me, it was thinking about it. I had the props for a lot of different things,
hmm
but I never had restaurant. Like, it was never a theme. It was never restaurant. It was never post
hmm
office. It was never superhero. It was never rocket ship. It's just the kids would play out different themes,
hmm
and they took up different amounts of space. But I never dictated what those were. And
Yeah.
sometimes, I'd bring in a vacuum cleaner hose because they were doing a lot of things that involved more like firefighting, or
Yeah.
but then it would become something else too, right? But it was just that idea of, so I would add little props every so often, but it wasn't, they were never very specific. It
hmm
was always really open-ended. And until right now, I never really thought about how that allowed for it. It wasn't like they were working against me, or
Uh-huh.
like, subverting what I
Yeah.
had because I didn't really have anything, I
Yeah.
guess. Or I had a lot of stuff, I guess, but not
Yeah. And
in a
that, I
way.
mean, that all tends toward allowing children to explore their own power.
Right,
All of that, even just the power to decide. I know Mike said we could use this as a fire hose, but I think it's for
right, right.
throwing balls through or something, just
Yeah,
the power in the moment to know what it was intended for, but also to know you have the freedom to try your own different idea.
right, right.
That's a big thing that's missing from a lot of early childhood
Yeah.
spaces.
Yeah. And I think, I worked at a place where we always had the what if attitude as teachers,
Yeah.
with all the rooms. Because one time I remember there was so much pretend going on where they were fighting over the couch, how to use the couch.
Uh-huh.
And we use conflict resolution. So Betsy Evans' book, Can't Come to My Birthday.
Uh-huh.
And they decided that, well, there's a couch in the other room. Could we use that? I was like, well, we can go ask. So they go ask the teacher in the other room. The teacher's like, fine. And then they like look at me and it's like, okay, guys, if you want the couch, you can bring it in. And I held the door open. The rooms were adjacent, right? So it was like
Uh-huh.
they just had to carry it through the door and
Uh-huh.
so they were at first like, what? And
Yeah.
then they figured out five of them could lift it up. It was just, a
Hmm.
kid-sized couch and
Yeah.
they carried it in.
How fun.
But so again, that idea of taking children's power seriously, both
Uh-huh.
the pretend, but also, yeah, I think what you're getting at, or what I'm hearing you say, is like, right, because I was also allowing the real power. And
Yeah.
that's what choosing your play theme is, the real power.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, which goes right into the next thing. One thing that I really loved that made me really stop and think because I speak sort of opposite of this sometimes, but you wrote, we do a disservice to children if we think of them as powerless. Perhaps they are when we view them from our adult world. And I have used the word powerless, but I think what
Yep.
I really meant was not allowed to
Yeah.
exercise their power, right? Not
Right,
that they're
right.
like weak or
Yeah,
incompetent.
right.
Um, so that really made me stop and process a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't think I had that until that's one of those points in the like when you write a book where you're like, oh, following my own logic here, they actually have a lot of power as I start to really view things from their perspective. And that
Hmm.
was my goal in writing the whole book was kind of reflecting on, whatever the 30 plus years of
Yeah.
kids that I've worked with of what was going on from their perspective. And it's like, oh, they didn't feel powerless, at least in those moments. It's not to
Hmm.
say there weren't other times they were mad at me because of, I had one year, kids were doing this whole campaign of no nap, no nap. And they made
Yeah.
signs, they had this circle with
Or a
like
real campaign.
kid laying
Okay.
down. And yeah, no, I mean it was we definitely were a hippie childcare center, right? Where
Uh-huh.
most of the kids were going to protests
Nice.
or theater,
Uh-huh.
apparently. So they were
What a
all ready
life.
to like, yeah, and they finally the director, or we didn't quite have a director, but the
Yeah.
person in the office pulled out the actual licensing rule book for the state and pointed to it. And of course, they can't read, but still read it out that they had to lie down quietly for 30 minutes to be given a chance to nap if they, whatever the
Uh-huh.
wording was. It was written a little more legalistically than that, but
Yeah.
they're just like, yeah, it's not up to Mike. It's the law. But and of course we had the hardcore kids who were still like that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like
Exactly.
resist.
Anarchy.
So, anyways,
Powerless.
yeah, they certainly had power. But yeah, but I think that idea that if we view ourselves as being like paternalistic, they only have power because of us
Uh,
versus oh, they do have power. They don't have power for everything. And that's where I think Eve Trook's like
yeah.
viewpoint and um, you know, listeners slash viewers can go to the first matriarchy
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah.
It's just so however many episodes earlier than this one, we talk more about it. But that idea of you do exert power for kids at times. But the more I thought about it, like there's so many times kids exert power for each other too.
Hmm.
And that's the part that yeah, the more you start to recognize that and the more you realize, oh, they're exerting power all the time
Hmm.
from their viewpoint. It might not be a thing of when they get to go home from school or
Right.
whatever, but they can decide that they, there's another kid in the room, that is upset about something, and they can go get that person's lovey and bring it
Uh-huh.
over to them, and they have the power to help someone
Hmm.
else, or they have, so they exert power for each other all the time. And we think of it from an adult lens. Oh, they are demonstrating empathy or whatever, this like thing. Let's put
Yes.
that on the list,
We love to
let's
see
just,
him demonstrate something.
yeah. Right. And again, there is nothing wrong with that if we
Right.
recognize that's just the adult lens. But at the same time,
Yeah.
they are seeing something happening in their world that is making them uncomfortable, right? Seeing a peer crying and realizing I have the power to change that
Hmm.
and they can go do it, right? And so, from their perspective, it's not just about empathy, it's about agency.
Hmm.
I mean, the very definition of agency is that you can do something that will affect the world you're in or the
Right.
community you're in.
Right.
And so that's the part that there's nothing wrong with that adult lens, but for this book, I was really trying to, well, what is it from their lens? And so
Sure.
power or agency, and I kind of use them interchangeably in a lot of ways, which
Hmm.
I think for the purpose of teaching doesn't matter. Um, I think in the field of psychology or other things
Yeah.
that it's going to matter more. But for me, it's like, but yeah, they're not totally powerless. There are some things where they are,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we do have to exert power for them.
Yeah. You do, yeah, I mean, there's a point here you say, I realize that feeling powerless can make someone more controlling. Again, I had to kind of pause and think about that because um for me, I always am trying to make the distinction because I feel like if I say just like, well, if you don't give them power, they're going to take it, that makes it sound like this trope, this myth of the manipulative child, the child who
Right.
is
Yeah.
cognitively so sophisticated that they can think of a way to make you miserable if they don't get
Right.
what they
Right.
want. And that's
Yeah.
not, I
Yeah.
don't think that's what you're saying here,
No.
but we do see when children don't have those kinds of opportunities. Maybe that's why they resist so much when it's time to go home at the end of the day, because they haven't
Right.
been allowed to feel powerful
Right.
enough.
Right. Yeah. 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 And I think, yeah, that, and then I think the whatever the probably whininess or the like the outward resistance also comes from just that tired, probably hungry,
Sure,
like all
yeah.
those
Yeah.
other things as well. Same with the
Yes, many
adult who
things
is
can
less
be true.
understanding because they are also tired and
Yeah.
hungry and they're like, we just have to go, right?
Yeah.
It's like at the point when neither one is at their like
Hmm.
it's not easy to stay regulated.
Right.
And all the more reason for the adult to just try to power through it and stay regulated. But
Yeah.
also it doesn't mean that you can't, just like, okay, right now I don't have time to discuss it. I just have to pick you up and we go home or whatever, but just that idea that, yeah, they need to have that sense of power.
Hmm.
And even with that, what I would say to a parent is like, you can just say we have to go, but just acknowledge their emotion around it, right? Because they still have that autonomy to be upset that they have to
Uh-huh.
leave now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're really sad that we have to leave. I know you want to keep playing right now, but we have to go home. The teacher has to go home, and I want to go have dinner with you, right?
Yeah.
So you can still go, but you're acknowledging that they did want to stay.
Yeah.
And I think that in those times when you have to exert power, and that's where some of the wording in the other episode we talked about, Eve Trook talks about when an adult is exerting power for a child. A lot of it is just a slightly different wording than if you're exerting power over a child or
Hmm.
on a child is the way she would say it.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same statement, but slightly more seeing their perspective a little bit. You really want to stay. You're really having fun, but we have to go
Mm-hmm.
because we have to be home in order to have dinner. And, we don't have dinner here. Whatever I mean, you
Yeah.
don't have to go on and on about it, but just that idea that the actual statement's the same. The
Yeah.
only difference is you are the one who has more understanding of, you know what, in 15 minutes, you're going to be so hungry, you're going to be crying and say you want food right away.
Yeah.
I know that we can get in the car and get home for that. And I even have crackers in the car for,
Uh-huh.
the whatever. And so there's reasons why the adult's doing it, but the wording is almost the same. It's just
Yeah.
delivered in a less harsh way. It's
Yeah.
delivered with maybe a statement of understanding, but otherwise it's, you know, same. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I kind of lost what the actual quote was now, but I think I
Um,
answered that one.
yeah, you did. Um, oh, there was just a big boom in my neighborhood. I wonder what that was. Hopefully everyone's okay. Anyway, you talk a lot about, or you really go in depth into four elements of power,
Yeah,
in the book, and their agency, self-efficacy, self-regulation, and connection. Do you want
yeah,
to talk about those kind of
yeah.
a bit?
Yeah, and this is where it gets a little bit. So I'm definitely mostly borrowing from Albert Bandura's
Yeah.
theory of agency and theory of self-efficacy. Um, and this is where the language is going to be slightly different than other fields.
Hmm.
But I think part of it is that often power is explained as agency in relation to others, right? That because you can have agents, self-agency, right? Of like
Hmm.
me getting up in the morning to do this podcast,
Right.
right, is like no one else. Well, I guess you would have been affected had I not done it. But that so that sense of agency, you have to really feel like, and of course this gets into belonging because everything does, that you are able to make a difference in the community you're in
Uh-huh.
or in your world, whatever your definition of world is. And that's where you can get into the Bronner, like,
Hmm.
sometimes it's just your family, sometimes it's in your classroom or your, group
Yeah.
care setting or whatever. So for young kids, they have to have that sense of being able to make a difference. And that's where you want to give them real examples of
Hmm.
making a difference. Like, wow, we can clean this table. We can make a salad with just these
Hmm.
vegetables or whatever
Hmm.
your thing is, but just that they learn they can do things. So that's part of it. And then the self-efficacy is that belief that you can do it, right? And so that part, it's almost like in some ways, some of these are easier to see when it doesn't happen,
Yeah.
right? The kid who just gives up right away. And so like putting on winter gear,
Hmm.
which, finally in Minnesota, we're almost in June, and I think winter's,
Almost done with your winter gear.
yeah, almost done with our winter.
Sounds like
We had
heaven.
85-degree weathers, and then suddenly it's 85-degree weather, and then it was like 39.
Oh my God.
It's just like, wow. But anyways,
Hmm.
so the kid who just getting their coat on is the first step, but like you have the kid who like they know they can't put the coat on, zip it up, like they can't do all the steps by themselves, and they'll just kind of give up.
Hmm.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
Right. So many of us do like know the thing of like, well, let me teach you the flip trick or
Yes.
whatever, and so they start to learn that and they're like, whoa,
Yeah.
I just did a thing. And what we're doing is we're breaking it down into steps. Like,
Hmm.
no, you can't do all of it, but you can do this right now. And learning any new skill, um, you start with what's the thing you learn first, and then you learn the next thing, and then you learn the next thing,
Hmm.
and so um that helps you then feel like you could do this. So with teaching, like in a lot of ways, when I think of Lillian Katz's stages of,
Hmm.
teacher development, that survival stage, it's because you can only think about today.
Yeah.
And then if you know that, or your director knows that, or whatever, then it's like, let's celebrate that you did everything today,
Yeah.
right? Like, let's break it down into steps and let's acknowledge the successes you do have. Because then you're, oh, wait, maybe I can do this. And suddenly, wait, I got a whole year in. And the next year rolls around, it's like, wait, I remember what it's like when a new class comes in.
Uh-huh.
or whatever the thing is. And so you can build off of it. So self-efficacy is just that knowledge that you can build, you can get there even though all the steps are um like if you think about everything, it's too much. But then if
Mm-hmm.
you okay, so what's the first step? You know, you like we
Yeah.
make the road by walking is a phrase. I don't know
Yeah.
if Miles Horton created that one, but that
Yeah.
idea of like, he's like, okay, so we have racism in America. What can we do? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't know if we can solve all of it, but we can take the first step,
Right.
right? And so that idea that you have to believe in what you do. Because if you, even if you have agency and like, oh, I can make Play-Doh, like that's cool. That's agency. But if it's like, oh, but can I, whatever, do
Yeah.
this other thing? Like, that's too much.
Yeah.
I'm giving up.
Yeah.
And then self-regulation for young children, it's
Yeah.
very obvious, right? Because usually the self-efficacy part is tied to it of if they get too upset.
Right.
And that's where
It's not just
um
compliance. We need
it's not just
everybody
yeah,
we
yeah.
need to stop using
Oh yes,
self-regulation as
let's
obedience and compliance.
yeah. But
Um,
let's think about the coat again, like a
yeah.
child who's like, okay, I know how to do the flip trick, but suddenly for whatever reason, they're wearing like a sweater or something.
Yeah.
So now the flip trick's gonna be a lot harder.
Right.
They're doing it, it's
My
like, oh
face
my
is stuck
God.
in the hood suddenly.
And they
Like,
sud or yeah, their hand and they get frustrated
yeah.
and frustrated when they get to that point where they're upset. And we all know it. Like when you can't find your keys and you get
Mm-hmm.
upset, it's going to be harder to find your keys,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the moment you just like, your spouse says, "Why don't you just take my keys?" And you're like, "Oh, okay," and
It
it like
really was
calms you
that
down,
easy. Okay.
right? But it's like when you get upset, you suddenly stop seeing all the possibilities
Mm-hmm.
that are in front of you,
Yeah.
and so you lose that self-efficacy when you're upset. So
Yeah.
if you can keep yourself, relaxed or calm, or you can calm down enough to do the thing, then you'll
Mm-hmm.
be able to. So from the teacher's point of view with the code example, there are those times when, oh, the child is not able to regulate right now. Just put the child's code on. You know what I mean? Like it's not a moral failing if,
Right.
you know what, they put on their coat themselves 10 times in a row, but today on, week two, they can't do it. You
Mm-hmm.
just help them. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, you're having a hard time today. Here, can I help you? Because now what you're adding is connection, which is a
Yeah.
great way to self-regulate or,
Yes.
or
To
co-regulate.
regulate.
So to regulate, yeah. And that's that idea of just, helping that person still see that they're able to do things, but connecting. And then so other ways of connection too, like I talked about the child who goes and gets the other child's lovey when they're
Mhm.
crying. Those connections are kind of what drives your agency, drives your self-efficacy. Because one of the things about self-efficacy that also helps is seeing other people do the thing you want to do,
Yeah.
right? I mean, just with writing books, when you're working on yours, I know you reached out to me, you reached out to
Yeah,
Lisa, you reached
I
out to
did.
other friends you have who've already been through that process. Because
Yeah.
the first time it's like, there are all these things, and you
Yeah.
think you're done, and then you get your first revisions, and it's
Yeah.
like, what? Like, yeah, I mean, for me, I felt like such a failure of like all these things I did
Yeah.
wrong. You know what I mean? I mean,
Or you're halfway through and you hate your subject.
or yeah, well, there's that part too. Or like, and I know, like now I know when I'm writing, there's always these points on me hit where I'm like, I'm actually not saying anything new,
Hmm.
you know? And then, well, and I do just go to, well, let me just work on this thing,
Hmm.
and then slowly I'll get to these points of, oh, wait, actually, there's a thing in here that does seem new, or.
Hmm.
But like in this new, but this is, I'm at the fun stage, right? Where it's like, now that it's out and it's like bound and like published and other people are reading, it's like, oh, there are some things in there that I wrote that aren't just rehashing what other people said.
Hmm.
But it's like when you're in the middle of writing, you kind of lose sight of all that. And so that is the connection, like having people read it and talk to you and things. And now I'm getting more into the book than about young children here, but but the same thing, right? That when they're trying to do something. And so this is not to say that there aren't kids who like to play by themselves. So I never want to lose that. But there still is that sense of like a lot of pretend play is the way kids connect. I said it's like
Hmm.
the way they decide they're friends because they pretend together.
Hmm.
And in the book, there's someone who's just named A. They wanted to stay anonymous, but like I knew them as a kid, and now they're in their early 20s. And she really she talked about the way she would play with her younger sibling,
Hmm.
and it was pretend play. They had totally different interests, except for like castle and knight, because one of them wanted to play princess and one wanted to play knight, and they could do that like if they played together, that was the
Hmm.
one thing they played. And so she kept referring to those as entry points, and I think that's true.
Ah,
And she even described it. I mean, that's the thing um I owe a lot of some of that part of the book to her, of just the way of talking about it, of there's what's going on in my head, there's what's going on in their
hmm.
head, and we have these
Yeah,
entry points. And so I was realizing with pretend that that's the key, right? That you have
yep.
kids like they might not know. I remember having a kid play Toy Story. I don't remember if I put it in the book, but he was always playing Toy Story with the other kids, and one person's Woody, one person's Buzz, all
Uh-huh.
this. And I was talking to the parents one day, and they were Seventh Day Adventists. Or
Ah,
I get my whatever. They didn't watch
yeah.
TV
Uh-huh.
at all, no mass media. And the parents were, "What's Toy Story?" And I explained, "Oh, well, it's this movie, whatever." And
Uh-huh.
like, "Oh, yeah," like he never would have seen it,
Uh-huh.
right? So I have no idea what he was picturing in his head. I'm sure
Uh-huh.
he saw pictures somewhere,
Yeah, he
it
wasn't
was when the
picturing
movie
Buzz
was
and
big.
Woody, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, but the truth is, it didn't have to look like the actual characters from the
Right.
movie. Sometimes when kids play monster or something like that, it's more obvious. And I know I talk about that in the book.
Hmm.
Each kid's idea of a monster is so different,
Hmm.
but they can all be picturing a completely different thing. But if they all know this is the thing I'm picturing that's scary, they can all react in a similar way. So there's these
Hmm.
like entry points that you don't have to have the same exact thing in your head as the other person,
Yeah.
but you do have to have a way that's shared. And so that connection makes this like world that like I think that's where you enter this like collaborative flow state
Uh-huh.
that um, is like different than anything else
Yeah.
in terms of what they do during the day.
Yeah. My little brother is 6 years younger than me. So, when he was 5 and really into Star Wars, I was 11 and not, but did
Yeah,
was still kind of into Barbie stuff. Honestly, I was into Barbies until I was almost 15.
yeah,
And still would if I had them. Um, but I remember like if he wanted me to play with him with his Star Wars stuff.
right.
I said, yeah, but in the dollhouse. Like, we
Ah,
can
yeah, yeah.
we can do dollhouse stories with your Star
Yep.
Wars figures, and that's kind
Right,
of what
right.
I thought of as I was reading A's story in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
book with the different entry points.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes it's compromise too, which is a skill. Although
Right.
maybe it was bossiness. I don't know that that was compromise with me and my brother.
Well, yeah, especially siblings, there's a certain amount of
Yeah,
that.
different dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, I only got to page 13. So clearly we're gonna have to have another couple of conversations.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think this is a good place to wrap up because I mean, the bulk of the rest of the book is you saying, here's what these four elements might look like in pretend
Right.
play, and here's how
Yeah,
pretend
yeah.
play really gives them an opportunity to build those four
Right, right.
and grow in those four areas. Um, but we have been going almost an hour, so
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the thing I'll say, just to sort of wrap up that thing
yeah,
of, because pretend play isn't the only way kids gain a sense of power or agency,
yeah.
but at the same time, there are certain things that pretend play allows for that make this an optimal way.
Hmm.
And again, this is one that you probably could create a checklist, but it'd be a lot harder because most
Yeah,
of this is internal,
yeah,
but also there wouldn't be a point to it, right? The main
right.
thing is to appreciate that from the child's perspective, all of that is happening. They're gaining this sense of self-efficacy. Maybe it will be for something academic later, right?
Hmm.
Like writing a book or
Hmm.
writing a dissertation or or whatever, completing your project in fifth grade. Like all of
Yeah.
those things start with this idea
Hmm.
of believing you can do it, doing it, and what imagination or what pretend allows for is it allows for you to imagine a world where you always have agency, you
Hmm.
always have power, and you can take on the role of the person who, doesn't have power or is having power exerted over them. Like kids playing, where, one's Darth Vader, one's Luke, and
Hmm.
one vanquishes the other. Like you
Yeah,
can take on that role, but then you can switch or you can
right.
jump out of it, or like you can decide, you know what, this is actually getting too scary,
Hmm.
or you can just change the narrative, you can change the character. Um, and so what Pretend offers is kids to try these things out in a way that they're so embodied
Hmm.
that they actually are feeling, getting back to the self-regulation, they are feeling their heart race.
Uh,
They are breathing more shallowly. Like they are experiencing fear in all of the physiological ways
uh-huh.
as they play out fear. The
Right.
difference is it's only pretend, so they can stop
It's a
or they can say, oh,
manageable
yeah.
context.
I think
Yeah.
in the book I say like, oh, the bear's, a friendly bear now, right? Like just that idea of
What
like
if,
you
what
can
if, what
just
if the bear was friendly now? What if, what?
right. So it's just that idea that
How about, that's what I love when
yeah,
kids start things with how
yeah,
about.
yeah. Pretend is just a way of being able to do all these things that could get overwhelming in real life.
Yeah.
And of course, kids do have situations in real life that do get overwhelming and they don't have control over.
Yeah.
But by being able to also do it in a pretend realm, it can carry them through. And there's so many, books and movies and things about that very thing of the
Yeah.
kid going through, whatever. I mean, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is happening during World War II,
Yep.
and Pan's Labyrinth is also during World War II, I think. And like, there's all these things, right? Because there is that idea of like my imagined world,
Uh-huh.
I can be the one that suddenly I'm the helping the king, or I
Yeah.
am the king, or like all these things, and it actually gets you through the real thing that you don't have power
Yeah.
over. So, yeah, so I think that I just wanted just get that in there for this first one of
Yeah.
why we're talking about these with pretend is because more than any other type of play, it gives kids an opportunity to
Hmm.
really explore these in ways that a 3-year-old otherwise
Yeah.
is pretty limited in. So,
Yeah. And I mean, what I think the magic of the book is that it starts at this place that we all feel like we have a pretty good appreciation for and understanding for. Like, not many people argue against children pretending.
right, right,
Um, but then you're like, oh, but wait, it's more than you think it is. And some of this stuff that you don't like is actually part of this good stuff over here.
right, right,
You talk about othering gunplay and superhero play and stuff like that. And I think
right.
it
Yeah,
just is, it's a really good uh, example of like meeting someone where they are and then being like, but have I got news for you?
right,
It's
right.
even more than
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And the truth is, some of that was even for myself, right? That's where we did an episode with Kay Burton, but she really
Uh-huh.
like made me rethink Princess Play was the one that I
Yeah.
was like stuck on. It's like, oh,
Yep.
I have a lot to learn from her. So
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna have to
so
put a bunch of other episode titles and numbers in the show notes for this one because we keep referring to
right, right.
old
Well,
episodes.
because of course the episodes led to me writing the book.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
how I work through my ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, oh, so the book again is called The Power in Pretend and it's from Red Leaf Press. I think everyone should read it. And Mike, hopefully we'll have find some time to come back and have a couple more conversations about it.
Yeah, I'm sure we can.
Yeah, I bet we probably could.
Yeah,
All
thanks.
right. Thank you. Thanks everybody for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.